Christ Community Church, located at 25th and Thomas Avenue in Portsmouth, Ohio.
Let's gather together. Good morning, Christ Community Church. I have to say, I'm impressed. This is like twice as many people as we usually have on a Labor Day weekend, so even with the people vacationing, but you are among the elect. So, well, I don't have a lot of time. I got way more questions last week. I got a bunch, but I got way more than I have time to, especially because Dad already delivered a sermon. So, it's like, dude, you're preaching next week. Come on. All right, anyway, got a lot of great questions, but I just can't get to all of them in the small, like 30 minutes we've got before we have to dismiss. Here's my favorite. I'm going to start this way. Never gotten this question before. And I've been doing this for 20-some years. Can Christians watch WWE? Yes, but why would you? I think what's underlining this question, I mean, come on, professional wrestling, it's soap opera for dudes, right? I mean, that's what it is. I mean, okay, spoiler alert, it's fake. It's all staged. It's all scripted. Sorry. Not saying they're not real athletes. They're big dudes. They get hurt, all that kind of stuff. But it's soap opera for dudes. I think what is underlying this question is this. How should we Christians feel about violence? Wrestling, boxing, UFC, whatever. How should we feel about that? And that's a very good question. Here's what we need to understand. First of all, and this is important, and this comes up all the time. Every few years I have to deal with this question. You need to understand something. God is not a pacifist. If you go to, I could point you to a dozen scriptures, but just for example, Exodus 15, 3 through 4. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his host he cast into the sea, and his chosen officers were sunk in the Red Sea. That's God. We are to be holy like God. God is not a pacifist. Now, that being said, we are never to inflict violence without a reason, ever. So Christians don't start fights. However, I will say this as your pastor. I don't want to hurt anyone for the rest of my life. I want to go to be with the Lord from here till that day, never hurting anyone. However, if you come into my home like a home invasion, if you threaten my wife or my family, I own 4 guns and I will use them. Does that make sense? And so when you're looking at sports, you're looking at people who are volunteering for this. And by the way, I can point you to a number of people who used to be in the UFC and so forth who have gone on to do training, self-defense training and so forth for people. That is a good thing. We have to realize as Christians there is evil out there. And unfortunately, because this is getting crazier and crazier, how many plane videos have you seen in the last 2 years of people getting into fistfights on airplanes? Which is bonkers, right? When I grew up, I never even heard of that. And so things have gotten crazy out there, and you do need to be prepared to defend yourself and defend your family but you never start anything. When Jesus talks about turning the other cheek, he's talking about that if you are personally insulted or if you as an individual are struck, you let it go. You just let it go. But it's something else if your family is at risk. Does that make sense? Now you're talking about somebody else. And that's different. And I know we just went through, in a more serious note, what happened in Minneapolis, which was horrific, absolutely horrific. And it's just a reminder of how much evil is out there and how much we need to have, to quote the poet Ron Burgundy, our head on a swivel, right? And we just have to be aware. So yes, you can watch wrestling, you can watch UFC. I'll take UFC, you take wrestling. I just don't care for it. But this is an interesting one. Did Adam and Eve go to heaven? Did Adam and Eve go to heaven? Well, Adam did. At least you're paying attention. Here's the thing. The Bible is pretty clear about people when they are faithful or unfaithful and how they depict them. And so, if you go to Genesis 5:5, it just says, thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years and he died. And that's all it says. So there's no indication there otherwise than that when Adam died, he went to paradise. When Christ died, Christ went to paradise. And then when he ascended, he took those in paradise with him, which means, yes, Adam is in heaven. Yes, Eve is in heaven. Because if you look at other places like 2 Kings 8:18, it says, and he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. That's the tombstone. Do you see that? So, yeah, there's no indication that Adam and Eve, despite the fact that they brought evil into this world, which, by the way, every time we sin, we bring evil into this world. We're no better. There's no indication that they were condemned to an eternity away from the presence of God. Now, that always raises this question, so let me try to preempt this. Every time I talk about Adam and Eve, anytime I talk about the patriarchs of the Old Testament, and I say something like Adam lived 930 years, people will come up to me and say, oh, come on. That's not possible. Well, actually it is. I was sharing this with Megan about a month ago or so. There's a book. I used to, once upon a time, when I traveled constantly, and I used to always grab a book, and I'm kind of a weirdo. I would get my stuff for Bible studies, and I would always look at Amazon for like something a little strange, a little different, And I got this one book called Long for This World, and it's about a Cambridge gerontologist. And this is interesting if you know your scripture. This is an atheist gerontologist from Cambridge University, and he said actually his study of DNA, of genetics, is there's no reason, he said, there's no reason why people can't live 1,000 years. He said there's actually almost what he called a switch in the genetic code that causes us to age. Now, if you go back and read Genesis, you'll see that God flipped that switch. But physically, actually, if you could tweak your DNA just a bit, you would be able to live on an average of 1,000 years. So that's absolutely true. Absolutely true. All right. Next question. I'm going to have to hustle here because I only got 20 minutes. Which version of the published Bible, as opposed to the unpublished version, Sorry, whoever asked this question, not making fun of you, but as a lawyer, kind of making fun of you. Which version of the published Bible is closest to the original and which is the farthest? It depends on what you mean. Here's the problem. Literal may not always be literal. I want you to hear me. Literal may not always be literal. Okay, so for example, I think I pulled this up. I'm going to read, we're getting ready to go into Ephesians, so I'm just going to read a random line from Ephesians in Greek. I'm just going to read it word for word. For to be us, to praise, glory, him, the ones trusted in Christ. That's Ephesians 1:12 in Greek, literally. Read it again. For to be us, to praise, glory, him, the ones having trusted in Christ. That's the literal word for word of Ephesians 1:12. Did you follow that? No. No. Okay. Because Greek doesn't work that way. And some of you who have studied other languages in school, maybe you studied Spanish or French or whatever. You know, I studied Spanish for 2 years in high school. All I remember is repiten, por favor. That's it. Well, that and the cuss words I learned in Los Angeles. But anyway, I can't repeat those. But the way language works, foreign languages, is often we're so used to subject, verb, object. That's how we think. The Greeks did not write that way. Sometimes you can ask Megan, she studied Greek for what, 5 years, something like that? 7, sorry, honey, 7 years. Greek sometimes would put the verb first and the subject last. It depended on what they wanted to emphasize. So if you're talking about a translation that you think is word for word, it's not word for word. It's just not. You have to look at the sentence, identify the subject, put things in order, and then also, as we've talked a lot about, you have to modernize the language. There are words that the writers of the New Testament used that we don't use anymore and wouldn't make sense to you. And so you have to find the closest equivalent and bring that forward. Does that make sense? Okay, now, don't get me wrong. I have problems with a number of the English translations. So I'm writing my dissertation on the writings of John. Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, Book of Revelation. That's my dissertation focus. And I get really irritated, as Megan is sick of me of saying, of how many of our English translations really butcher John. So if you go to 1836, John 1836. Now this is from the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. I think that translation is, in the New Testament, impeccable. Now, don't buy it. You don't need to buy it. You can get it on BibleGateway.com for free. Don't buy it because the company that produces it, I do not endorse. However, the scholars who did this did a good job. So, John 18:36, Jesus is before Pilate. And Jesus answered, "My kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." In the Greek, not arising from here. That is a much better translation than the NIV, New American Standard, New Living Translation, etc. Because they all say something like, "My kingdom is not of this world," which makes it sound like Jesus is only concerned with spiritual things and the physical things don't matter and the day-to-day doesn't matter. That's not what it says. That is not what it says. What Jesus is answering a direct question from Pilate, and he is saying, "I am not Because what Pilate's asking him is basically, are you a political rebel? Are you trying to take on the Roman Empire? And Jesus said, dude, do you see soldiers around me? That's not what I'm trying to do. But that does not mean that he does not care about our lives. And I think those other translations do a poor job because it can send that signal, and I think that's bad. Another issue I had. Now, with the Old Testament, my primary Old Testament professor in seminary was a guy named John Willis. He was a brilliant guy. I have no idea how many languages he read. He may have read 12 languages. He was the chief editor of the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament, which he had to translate from Hebrew to Dutch to English. And before he died, he did 12 volumes, going through every word of the Hebrew Bible. And he used to tell me that the only translation of the Old Testament at that time that he trusted was the Revised Standard Version. Now again, the people behind the RSV were not always the best people. I don't want you to go out and buy one. However, it's a good translation. And John Willis used to argue, he would say, go to 1 Samuel 9:16. He said, if you're looking for a good English translation, go to 1 Samuel 9:16. Here's how the RSV reads it, and this is how it should read. Tomorrow, about this time, I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be prince, not king. You shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, for I have seen the affliction of my people because their cry has come to me. One of the questions I get all the time is, how in the world can God say that David is a man after his own heart when David was a murderer and, to use my dad's language, had a zipper problem? How is that possible? Here's what I would argue. David never refers to himself as king because he sees who is king. David, unlike Saul, always saw himself as a man under authority. Does that make sense? The rest of the kings of Israel, they saw themselves as, I rule. David said, no, God rules. To the point where there's a reason why you have that section in Samuel where David is dancing in front of the ark in his undies, and his own wife goes, why are you humiliating yourself? And he goes, I will always humiliate myself before the Lord, before the king. David is saying, I'm not king. I do what he says. And yes, he messed up, and he repented of that, and that's why when he repents of the murder and his adultery, what does he say? Against you only, God, have I sinned. Because he recognizes, he reports to him. These are the little things in Bible translations that are important. Do you follow me? That I think are vitally important. So I like the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. I like the old RSV when it comes to the Old Testament. For general reading with some gripes, the New Living Translation and the Common English Bible are good. But if you're looking for a study Bible, and I know a lot of you have asked Megan and I about that, in my opinion, the best study Bible is the Reformation Study Bible by R.C. Sproul. I think the notes are excellent. Absolutely excellent. If you're reading the King James or the New King James, we'll talk. It was, don't get me wrong, the King James was the best translation in the 17th century. It's no longer that. And by the way, for the people who don't get into fights with people over this, if they're reading their King James, great. They probably don't understand it, but God bless them. However, you need to understand a little bit of the history real quick. The reason why we have the King James is because the most popular Bible at the time was the Geneva Bible, which had study notes. It was the first Bible with study notes. And the Geneva Bible in Romans said that because all worldly leaders are under God, if those worldly leaders do not submit to God, then the people have a right to overthrow them. And King James said, no bueno. Don't like that. Get rid of that. And so James ordered a new translation and a new Bible because he hated the Geneva Bible. And if you read about the life of James, people will pick up their King James and goes, authorized version. Authorized by who? Authorized by King James. And King James was such a drunk. He died early of alcoholism with no teeth. And when he had foreign dignitaries over to his palace, it usually would take the help a week to clean up all the vomit and urine. That was James. So authorized by who? Just saying. Find yourself a good Bible that makes sense to you. And if you need help, I'll help you. Megan will help you. Does that make sense? Okay? The two Bibles I would tell you absolutely do not take anything from the Jehovah's Witness or the Mormons. Other than that, we'll talk. Okay? All right. What is your favorite verse and your least favorite verse? Oh. If I said I had a least favorite verse, I'm pretty sure I'd be struck dead up here. So I don't have a least favorite verse. My favorite verse, I've told you, is that the Spirit inspired Paul, in my opinion, to write the best summary of the gospel, which is 2 Corinthians 5:21. I think all of you need to have 2 Corinthians 5:21 memorized. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. That's the gospel. That God made the Son take our punishment on the cross. And then when we profess faith, we become one with him, and his life becomes ours, and we are judged by his life, and then we have right standing with God. That's the gospel. That's the gospel. Why is the Old Testament ignored? Well, my wife's going to try to fix that. She's doing her PhD in it. It's because it's so alien to us, right? It's just the farther back you get in history, you're going to find that the culture and customs changed, and it's just alien. However, there are a couple reasons why the Old Testament is so important to read. The first is this: it points to Jesus constantly, absolutely constantly. And the best person to listen to on this is the late Tim Keller. Listen to the late Tim Keller's sermons on the Old Testament. He will show you how it points to Jesus consistently. Now, that means that, number one, if all this history, thousands of years of history, and all these events were happening, and yet the people involved did not know that they were pointing to Jesus, and yet they were all pointing to Jesus, what does that show you? It shows you God is in control. Do you hear me? If God, from Genesis 1 all the way through Malachi, can orchestrate events without people knowing, and they all point to Jesus, that means God is in control. Which means whenever you go through crisis, you need to recognize God is in control. God is in control of history. We get so worked up by politics, and I don't say that politics is unimportant, but we get so worked up in politics, like election night, God's up there doing this. Oh, who's going to win? Oh, give me a break. God is in control. Number two, because all that history points to King Jesus, that means the center of history is Jesus, not you. Not you. The center of history is Jesus. It's all about Jesus. All of it. I've told you many times, somehow when I'm preaching, if I ask you a question, what's 2 plus 2, and you go Jesus, somehow that's right. Okay. The third thing, the reason that you should study the Old Testament is the law of God. You need to know the law of God, especially as it's so perfectly summarized in the 10 Commandments in Exodus 21 through 17. Nothing in those 10 Commandments has changed. God gave that as the law. Malachi says God does not change, so the law has not changed. The law remains. And what we learn from the law is, one, we're sinners, and two, we learn the perfect morality of God. That's what we learn. There's a reason why Christians like myself argue that the 10 Commandments should be posted everywhere, in public and private. I can argue as a lawyer, and I have, that because, one, it's the basis of our entire law. Our Constitution, the Founding Fathers, based our law on the 10 Commandments. That's just a fact. It's a historical fact. And also because God is God, God is in control. If He says this is the law, that's the law. So nothing has changed. The law is the law. How we apply it has changed. That has changed. But the law has not changed. So, just indulge me for a minute. If you haven't read the 10 Commandments, you should. You should have a copy in your house. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Has that changed? You shall not make yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven or above, or that is the earth beneath, or that is in the water or under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Has that changed? You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. You should respect God and respect his name. Has that changed? No. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your servant, or your cattle, or the sojourner who is within your gates, the strangers, the visitors. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. I know that many of you don't practice the Sabbath. You should. You should. I will take a moment to brag on my wife a little bit. She's been working her tail off, averaging 4 meetings a day, several hours a day, meeting with women and helping them, sharing the gospel, discipling them. She's exhausted. It's exhausting. And you need rest. You need a day. Your whole family needs a day dedicated to worshiping the Lord and resting. Worshiping the Lord and resting. You should have that. Jesus did not overturn the Sabbath. Now, he taught us how to see it correctly. We shouldn't be legalistic about it. If some of you have a medical emergency, we don't need to go out and tell the ambulance driver, what do you think you're doing? It's a Sabbath. No, of course. But we need to worship the Lord and rest and give him a day. Okay. This next question, somebody's just trying to get me in trouble. Why do you guys do this to me? What did I do to you? Why doesn't Jesus mention the rapture? You guys want to, I get so much flack for this. Oh boy. Here's the deal. Here's all I'm going to say, and I'm going to leave it alone. This is a pretty good book. It's by a church historian named Arthur Rainwhite, who used to teach at Emory University. And it's called Mysterious Apocalypse, Interpreting the Book of Revelation. This is a history of the interpretation of the book of Revelation. Okay? It's a professional historian. He says that John Nelson Darby, a lawyer, don't trust lawyers, a lawyer in the 19th century basically invented the rapture. Don't believe me? Read the book, pages 82 and 83. Right there. Okay? So quit throwing darts and arrows at me. I've heard a lot of you complain about it, all kind of stuff. Read the book. Just read the book. It's right in there. The book of Thessalonians, for example, does not talk about the rapture. It's talking about the second coming. And I absolutely believe that. And nobody knows when that will be. No one knows. Even your favorite TikToker and YouTuber does not know when Jesus is coming back. No one knows. The trumpets will sound. The King will appear. He will judge the living and the dead. What he means by that, those who are living on the earth when he returns, and the dead who are not faithful to God, who are in Hades, Sheol, they will be resurrected for judgment. Those of us who have faith in Jesus, who have died before his return, we will go to heaven with him and we will return with him. Does that make sense? Don't ask me when that's going to be. Quit looking for signs. You don't know. Nobody knows. Jesus made it very clear. No one knows. It could be in a minute or it could be in 10,000 years. We don't know. Trust God. It'll be at the right time. Okay? Oh boy. There's a lot here, and I've got like 4 minutes. Let me end with this one. There's all kinds, like somebody asked, do animals go to heaven or hell? I know where Megan's dogs are going. Oh boy, they poop on that rug one more time. Let me go out with this one, though, because this one's important. Do children who basically don't survive the womb, do they go to heaven without hearing the gospel? Let me make this as clear as I can. Yes. In Luke 1:15, we read that John the Baptist was actually regenerated by the Holy Spirit in the womb before he was born. Before the gospel, he was regenerated. So yes, God can save even those who have not heard the gospel. Absolutely, positively. I know that a lot of people here have lost children. I believe with absolute certainty that whenever God calls you home, you will meet King Jesus, and then you'll meet your baby. I believe that. I absolutely believe that. There are a lot of more questions here, but I don't have time to get into them. But if you have any questions, always, you can always reach out to me. My email is pastormattar@yahoo.com. You can email me. You can come up and ask. Or you can just take a piece of paper if you want to remain anonymous, write it on it, put it back in the kiosks, and I'll try to answer it. It's one of the reasons I'm here. It's one of the reasons I'm working on a PhD. The reason I'm doing a PhD, folks, is not because I'm trying to find some sweet professor gig and leave you all in the dust. Much to my chagrin, as much as I would love to be living on a beach, I pretty much know that I will go to be with the Lord in Southern Ohio. Heaven better be really good. And I know that because the woman I married, and we'll talk about this more at the men's huddle, not the women's huddle. The woman I married, I adore. And unfortunately, she adores you. And she never wants to leave because she loves you all. So that means I don't get to leave. I'm here. So I'm not looking for a professor gig. I'm just trying to become better at this job that God has given me, and I'm blessed by it, as much as I kid about it. And so if you ever have questions, please let us know. Let me know, let Megan know. That's one of the reasons we're here, is to help you understand the God you worship, the faith you claim, so that you can better understand it, better live it, and better share it. Does that make sense? That's the only reason we're doing these PhD studies, is just try to understand it better, to help you understand it better, to have holier lives, and to help others. Okay? All right. May God bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. May he grant you peace. Christ Community Church, have a great Labor Day weekend. But remember, who is your king? Jesus. Who is your king? Jesus. Then go be his church. God bless you.
Christ Community meets on Saturday at 5 p.m. and Sunday at 10:30 a.m. For more information, visit www.christcommunity.net or check out our Facebook page.